and rings on the cell phone, no answer. I call Sydney back, rings and rings, no answer. I call Brenda back, ring, no answer. I'm pacing around. I call Jeep back, and as I'm on the phone with him telling him there's no answer, my daughter calls me back, and she went, "There's been a break-in," and she just started going off. She said, "What?" She said, there's been somebody broke into the house. There's blood everywhere. And I'm like, "Stop!" And then that's when I called. I mean, I'm sure.
This is minor. There might have a more. I don't know. Check that victim in there. She's got cuts on her hands. I don't know what they have in there, but there's a female. Okay, she's got minor cuts.
On March 3rd, 2020, a shocking crime unfolded in Akron, Ohio. 19-year-old Sydney Powell brutally attacked her mother, Brenda Powell, inside their home, striking her with a frying pan and stabbing her nearly 30 times. The incident occurred moments after Brenda discovered that Sydney had been suspended from college, something her daughter had desperately tried to hide. What followed was a chilling sequence of events, from Sydney's frantic 911 call to her unsettling behavior when police arrived. This is the story of a murder that left a community in disbelief and a courtroom divided over whether it was cold-blooded murder or a psychotic break. Akron police responded to a welfare call from Sydney Powell's college administrators. They had been on the phone with her mother, Brenda Powell, when something went terribly wrong. Suddenly, they heard noises of a struggle and the call was cut off. Worried for Brenda's safety, they quickly called the police, leading officers to a shocking crime scene. Bodycam footage captures the intense moment when police pull 19-year-old Sydney Powell out of her home.
Okay. What is your name?
Sydney?
Come on. Come on.
You said the ground.
Yeah, you're fine right there.
No.
You're fine right there.
I grabbed the knife.
This is minor. There might have a more. I don't know. Check that victim in there. She's got cuts on her hands. I don't know what they have in there, but there's a female down in there. Okay, she's got minor cuts. Pretty bad up there. What's your name, ma'am? Sorry, what's your name again?
Inside, her mother, Brenda Powell, lies on the bedroom floor brutally beaten and covered in blood. Sydney is hysterical, sobbing as she asks if her mother will be okay and desperately calls out for her father. When officers question her about what happened, she struggles to explain, saying, "We heard a bang, and she told me to get out. Somebody broke in." But as the investigation unfolds, police begin to question whether Sydney is telling the truth. Sydney's hands are covered in blood as police shine their flashlights on her. An officer checks if she is hurt, but she seems unsure. Overwhelmed, she breaks down, falling onto the edge of the driveway, crying uncontrollably. Her body shakes as she lies on the cold pavement, struggling to process what is happening. Meanwhile, officers continue their work, trying to understand the violent scene inside. The father, Steve Powell, arrived at the scene after a friend notified him that police had been dispatched to his home. His face filled with panic as he rushed to find out what was happening, repeatedly asking officers if his wife was okay. Desperate for answers, he told the police that he and his wife had just discovered Sydney was having problems at school and that she had come home that day to work things out with her mother. His confusion and worry were evident as he struggled to understand the chaos unfolding around him. As another officer arrives at the scene, urgency fills the air. The Bodycam footage captures the chilling reality inside the Powell home. Sydney Powell stands inside, a stunned expression on her face, while her mother, Brenda Powell, lies critically injured. Without hesitation, the officer rushes past Sydney, focusing on providing aid to Brenda. The scene is chaotic: blood on the floor, muffled sounds of distress, and a race against time to save a life. Meanwhile, investigators comb through the scene, piecing together the brutal nature of the attack. The weapon, a frying pan, was not just used to strike Brenda, but to stab her repeatedly. Officers discussed their findings, sharing disturbing details of the assault. Each revelation paints a clearer picture of the horrifying reality. This was not a moment of rage, but a prolonged and violent attack. At this point, Sydney stopped responding and became catatonic, lying motionless on the ground. She was eventually transported to a local hospital for treatment of minor injuries. Meanwhile, her mother, Brenda Powell, was rushed to Cleveland Clinic Akron General, but despite the efforts to save her, she succumbed to her injuries shortly after arriving. Investigators quickly determined from the crime scene that Sydney was the one who had attacked her mother. However, uncovering the reason behind the violent act would take much longer. As they continued to gather evidence and piece together the events of that day, the mystery of Sydney's motives remained unresolved. Sydney had been hiding a secret from her parents for months. It all came to light when they discovered that she had been unenrolled from Mount Union University in Alliance, Ohio, after failing 3 out of 4 of her classes in the fall semester of 2019. The college administrators had asked her to move out of her dorm right away, but it wasn't until February 24th, 2020, that Sydney finally packed up and left. Even then, she didn't immediately tell her family and friends what had happened, keeping the truth hidden until the situation escalated. Sydney Powell was arrested and charged with the murder of her mother, Brenda Powell. She faced charges of aggravated murder, and felonious assault. As the investigation unfolded, it was revealed that Sydney had been struggling with academic failure and family issues that had been kept hidden for months. With the evidence pointing directly to her, Sydney was taken into custody. The arrest marked the beginning of a lengthy legal process as investigators and the community tried to make sense of the violent crime committed by a young woman once thought to be in distress, not danger. After the shocking events at the Powell home, investigators sat down with Steve Powell to understand what led to the brutal attack. As the father of Sydney Powell and the husband of Brenda Powell, Steve found himself caught between grief and disbelief. Detectives wanted to know what had been happening in their family leading up to that tragic day, and if there were any warning signs that had gone unnoticed. During the interview, Steve appeared shaken, struggling to process the reality of his wife's murder and his daughter's arrest.
I mean, he can go home with and Dave said he could go there with that, but that's just out of the, I opened that already.
Yeah, that's what I did.
I am. But I mean, he was supposed to stay. The key is to make sure he stays there until I can figure out what the hell I'm going to do. I don't know. I mean, we have to do something tonight because we're not going back home. I don't even know when am I going to be able to get back home.
Back home?
Yeah. Like getting to the house, I mean,
Today?
oh, okay.
Yeah.
So
Well,
you get there
they'll do
and-
what they gotta do. It's, yeah. I mean, you'll be able to go back home. That's what I mean.
Well, I want to is the question.
Well, that's what I'm getting at. Is,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, but I can get in there and.
Once they're doing, they got, like I said, they have things they have to do out there.
Mm-hmm.
Put the pieces of the puzzle together, figure out what's going on, etc.
His voice wavered as he recounted the last conversations he had with Sydney and Brenda. The weight of the tragedy was evident. His family, once whole, had been torn apart in a way he never could have imagined. As the questioning continued, Steve revealed the struggles Sydney had been facing. He told detectives about the recent discovery of her academic failures, how she had hidden the truth about being unenrolled from college, and the difficult conversations they had in the days before the attack.
I tried to get back. Oh, Mount Union calls me today because I sent them an email that says my user ID is this, my ID is this, my password's not working, my recovery answer won't work, and I know where I was born, I know my car, and it doesn't when you type in your recovery email. The system just it didn't recognize it. So I sent Mount Union Billing an email and says basically, what's wrong? So she calls me back today and says, well, the reason you can't get on, long story short, is your daughter's unenrolled. So I went, what's going on? So I text Sydney, I'm like, oh, give me a call. I have a question to ask you. I call her, no answer. I say, give me a call, question to ask. I have a question to ask you. And I look on that little Life 360 app, and her car was at home. I'm like, well, that's kind of weird. So I leave my phone at home so she can't track me. And I said, well, but that's all part of it. Nobody's going to tell you you need to do what you're doing when you're 20. You need to figure it out. But you have to work through the problem. You can't just ignore the problem and have it go away. It's not
I'm sorry, when did you have that conversation?
today, like 11:30. I don't remember. Yeah, it was before I left work. I left work because it was before lunch. It was maybe around 11, because I was probably there from 11 to 11:30.
He explained that Sydney's return home was meant to be a fresh start, a way to address her mistakes, but instead, it ended in tragedy. As the interview came to an end, Steve Powell was left grappling with the unthinkable reality his wife was gone, and his daughter was responsible. Investigators had gathered crucial insight into Sydney's mindset and family life. But the biggest question remained, why did this happen? And could anything have been done to stop it? The case of Sydney Powell left many unanswered questions and a shattered family. Sydney's troubled past, her failing grades, the secretive nature of her struggles, and her growing emotional turmoil was exposed in the aftermath. Despite the attempts to understand her motives, there was no clear explanation for such a violent act. Sydney pled guilty to aggravated murder and was sentenced accordingly, but the emotional scars left on her family and the community remain. The tragic events of that day serve as a reminder of the dangers of unchecked emotional pain and the heartbreaking consequences that can follow.